And the first publisher wanted me back, but they couldn't get me back for epic fantasy because of the contract. So they said, well, we're doing an anthology on, this is how they pitched it to me. We're doing an anthology about magic, but it has to be real magic, not any of that hand-wavy wizard stuff. Fortunately, I want you to let that sink in. This is a real conversation. Fortunately, I speak geek and genre, and I said, oh, you mean urban fantasy, modern-day world magic? Yes. So I wrote them a story with modern-day world magic, and then they came back and said, would you like to do a series? The answer is always yes. And so that became urban fantasy. So, and I'd always loved the urban fantasy TV shows as much as I had always loved the epic fantasy books. So it was like, well, sure, if I can play in more than one sandbox, this is a lot of fun. And then every time I picked up a new genre that I liked to read, the back of my brain was going, well, here's a story you could write. And so one thing led to another, and now there's steampunk, and now there's near future post-apocalyptic. And now there's male-man romance under my Morgan Bryce name. So it really was what I liked to read and then wanted to write because I liked to read it so much. Let's back up and talk about where the whole concept of genre comes from and what it means. Lucy, what does it mean and where did it come from for you?
For me, well, I think that genre is a lot more important now than it used to be. If you look back, I mean, now we have separated out literary fiction and genre fiction and that kind of stuff. And, you know, back in the early 20th century when publishing as we used to know it until last week was first getting started, I mean, everybody read James Joyce and everybody read, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald, because those were the popular novels of the day. I think that keywords, Amazon, the internet, have made genre very, very important. But they've also made it possible, I think, to cross genres, because the trick, I love what Gail just said, I write what I want to read. Write what you're passionate about. Please don't try to follow a genre trend. Please don't try, because if you're not writing the book of your heart, it's not going to go anywhere. Nobody's going to want to read it. No matter how skilled a technician you are, you need to be passionate about your book. But once you've written that book, there are people out there who are going to want to read it. Mm-hmm. And the trick, I think, and Gail is very good at this, is finding the keywords, finding the genre labels, when you're putting it up on Amazon, or you're putting it up elsewhere, or you're talking about it on a panel or whatever, you say the right word where your reader goes, that's the book I've been looking for forever. That's the book I've been looking for forever. A shifter book that isn't about sex. So, yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think genre is important because it offers diversity, and it gives the reader a chance to choose what they want. Sorry, I'm not as
No one is, darling. Never apologize for that. That's a virtue.
Yeah, so it's a marketing tool. You know, it really doesn't mean all that much, because to me anyway, because there's no one enforcing. Like, I can put my book in whatever genre I want to. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm not going to do well if I don't put it in the right genres, right. But just because a book is in a genre doesn't mean it's necessarily what I'm trying to find, right? So it's kind of a helpful tool, but, you know, for me anyway, well, for example, trying to find a shifter book with no romance. If I type in shifter book with no romance, you know what the first thing that comes up is? A romance shifter book. It's like
that's a word.
Exactly. It's like,
because the algorithm doesn't read the stuff in between, it just hears shifter and romance.
Yep. Action-packed urban fantasy. The first thing that comes up, a romance book. It's like,
well, spoiler alert, as someone who writes romance, and I think that Gail will back me up on this, of all of those books that come up as romance books, I would say a good third of them are any more romance books than your books are. No. But there are a lot of people who are just starting out or whatever, that they read that romance is the most popular genre that sells better, so they kind of come, you know what? As my kick-ass barbarian is walking down the street, he thinks, "Ooh, she's pretty hot." It's a romance.
Yeah, what they really mean is maybe romantic subplot.
Yeah.
But
Right.
And hence we get to genre can be problematic, trying to use or figure out what
Right.
you're trying to find.
genre also got, if it didn't get a start with bookstores and it got a big boost from bookstores, and tried to figure out where to put a book on which shelves. Now, if you get famous enough, and like your Charlene Harris, they put you in horror, mystery, and probably urban fantasy. But once upon a time, you were only supposed to be in one place. And I heard Sherilyn Kenyon talk about how her Anita Blake series got turned down by like 65 publishers. And they said, it's not that the books aren't good, we don't know where to shelve them in Barnes & Noble. Well, now she gets her own set of shelves, you know. But at one time, that was a big deal. We don't know what shelf to put these on. And things have loosened up a lot since then. But I think that the physical bookstores were a big part of that
Yes.
original push to find a genre to peg things in. And now the idea of cross-genre is, well, if I'm writing in the real world with magic, and that is operative, then that is an element of urban fantasy.
Right.
People, I think, are much more used to having, as the old commercial goes, peanut butter on your chocolate and chocolate on your peanut butter.
Mhm.
You know, people are, maybe they always would have been accepting of that, and it was really just the publishers that thought we had to have strict categories.
Absolutely. That's what you're talking about, not knowing where to put it on the shelf. When I first started publishing romance novels for Simon & Schuster back in the very early 2000s, they had a real hard time knowing where to shelf my books because I had so many high fantasy elements in it. So much. Basically, I was writing romantasy, but nobody knew what romantasy was yet. There had not been a big romantasy book yet. Book Top didn't exist, whatever. And so I had to find my audience, which was there, without the marketing people at my publisher really knowing where they were or how to find them.
Well, if you think about it, there are a lot of classic books. You know, look at Robinson Crusoe, Peter Pan, and all of those that have been filed over the years in adventure or children's books or fantasy. And it kind of all depends on who was doing the filing, but they fit in all of those. So it started out as being a way to find something in a bookstore, and then that got complicated when we went online. So how did you pick the genres you now write in? Lucy?
Exactly the way you did. I write what I want to read. I write what I want to read. Now, I had always read romance. I never had much interest in writing it. I got really sick, and I won't give you the details, but I was down for the count for about a month. Now, my mother was the most avid romance reader ever in the history of time. And I needed distraction. So she brought me literally a hefty bag, garbage bag.
Romance readers will do that.
Right, full of historical romances. Some of which did have strong high fantasy elements in them. And some of them were absolute crap, and some of them were really good. But in the process of reading them, I kept thinking, I could do better than this. I can do better than this. Exactly. And so at that time, I had an agent, and because I had already done the Forever Night book, and he was shopping a literary novel for me because, you know, I had gone to grad school, so I was supposed to write a literary novel. And I wrote, at that time you could get away with writing the first 3 chapters and then outline of the balance and pitch that before you wrote the whole book. And so I sent that to him and said, you know, if I was in the bookstore, this is what I would want to read, and, you know, so is this something you would be interested in doing? And he's like, no, we'll give it a try. And he came back to me 2 weeks later and said, yeah, your dream publisher wants it. Because that was the book I wanted to read.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I was really passionate about it. I really enjoyed the process. And,
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's pretty much the same for all of us. I love paranormal. I've had paranormal experiences. I'm a paranormal investigator. I put it on paper. And then why not share my experiences with everyone else?
Okay.
We will talk later.
This is how it started.
Yeah, same thing, like Lit RPG example, just like what you said. A friend of mine reached out and said, hey, I want to write a book, and, I have books out at this point. Let's get together and, give me some pointers. I said, okay. So we sat down, and he wants to write Lit RPG. Never read it. I've heard of it. Don't know much about it. So he sends me a couple audiobooks of really popular ones. So I listened to one, and it is, to date, the worst book I have ever read. Simultaneously, I was so intrigued by, now if I think a book is bad, I'm not finishing it. It's like, this isn't worth my time. This book, I suffered through the entire thing because I was so intrigued by the Lit RPG-ness of it. It was a train wreck that I couldn't get off of. You know what I mean? So, but it was, yeah, if this is what people are reading, it's like, I can do better than this. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I just released my first one, and I'm having so much fun with it. It is the best. I'm pumped. I'm pumped about the Lit RPG.
And I'll bet that book sells really well when he comes out with it.
Yeah.
My first, yeah.
Well, and for me also, when I find myself absolutely obsessed with something, I go back and I reverse engineer it to say, why do I like this? What is this? What buttons of mine is this pressing that I am this into it? Because it's feeding something. It is scratching an itch. What is it that I didn't know I had that I am getting from this? And I always loved urban fantasy and the whole idea of there's another whole paranormal world out there just below the surface. Mm-hmm. And I was already writing that with the Deadly Curiosity series and the Night Vigil series on the Gail side. But I fell in love with the TV show Supernatural. I binge watched 11 years in 4 months, so I'd be ready for the season 12 opener. When the show was on hiatus, I had not read fan fiction since I was in college, and it was like, okay, archive of our own, here I am. Not only fell in love with all the case fic, but said, ooh, what's this slash stuff? And I went over and I read hundreds and hundreds and said, ooh, this is good stuff, I am really enjoying this. Who writes it that isn't tied into a series, that isn't fanfic? Oh, wow, there's a whole genre here, and these are really good, I'm enjoying this. And now I've got all kinds of ideas for my own stuff, based on what made me fall in love with the show, what made me fall in love with other people's series, what elements did I like about it, what was feeding my soul. And now I harvest all those pieces that are all those tropes or all those elements that fed my soul with those things and say, okay, now I'm going to do an original work around this. And now I've got 6 series. So this is what works. It's kind of like bringing home stray puppies, They always give you those puppy eyes, and then you bring them home, and the next thing you know, they bring friends. So that's the way it works.
They take it over your whole life.
So, what's the challenge of writing cross-genre? Lucy?
Making fans of both or all 3 or all 6 genres satisfied with the story. For example, every genre has expectations. With romance, they're very clearly delineated. If you're going to write romance, it's very easy. Google can show you within 1.2 seconds exactly what the rules are to call something a romance novel.
I don't like following.
No, me neither. So the trick becomes, but other genres who will tell you, oh yeah, I don't write romance, it's too hidebound, it's too, trust me baby, break the rules in urban fantasy and don't do it well, and you'll find out just exactly how much there are rules to pretty much anything. So know the rule, write what you read extensively in every genre that you're interested in, and then find a way to satisfy all of those readers. Give all of those readers what they want. I'll tell you, one book that came out, I guess like 2 years ago now, that if somebody's asking me, how do I do this? I recommend Gail, of course. But also, if you've read Legends and Lattes, okay, that book has a beautiful, sweet romance, but it's not a romance book. That book has beautiful, high fantasy characterization, but it's not a high fantasy. That book does a great domestic found family story, but it's not a domestic cozy. It's all three of those things because the elements that it has from all of those genres are done so well that you can be a reader of any of those genres and find what you're looking for in that book. Find that swell of satisfaction of, God, this is a good book. I want to live here. I want to go to this coffee shop. I want to be there. And that's the sweet spot. That's what you're looking for.
I love sitting next to this. She's answered all my questions. She hit the nail on the head, though. I mean,
If you're gonna mix genres, you've got to do it well, and you've got to satisfy everyone involved. That's the end game.
So she's talking about the rules. I have a thing saying, I think I came up with it. If I didn't, I'll take credit. But I say you got to know the rules. If you break a rule because you didn't know it was a rule, it's a mistake.
Right.
Right? If you know the rules and you choose to break it, that's a different thing, right?
Because there's intention behind it, there's reason behind it.
So, don't make mistakes, but you can break the rules. So with I did a sci-fi lit RPG. Now, most of the time in lit RPG, it's fantasy based, right? So that was a risk to a certain extent of, are those readers going to want to read sci-fi when they're used to people swinging swords around and all that kind of stuff? So it's kind of cross-genre a little bit, even though it's technically, whatever. But adding a sci-fi element to it, I just have to do the lit RPG things that people want, like, and expect, and hopefully do the sci-fi things well enough to where, it won't matter. We'll see. So far, accepted well. Nobody's trashed it yet, so.
Listen, if nobody's trashed it yet, you're doing very, very
Right.
It goes back to what hooks you in on a genre. I started reading epic fantasy when I was in middle school and high school. I was there for the big Tolkien boom in the early 80s. And I majored in history in college because I knew I wanted to write books someday and I wanted to write medieval epic fantasy. And so I majored in medieval history. And then I did an MBA in marketing because someday I was going to have books and needed to be marketed. And I wanted to know.
See, this is why we all worship at Gail's altar because,
And it only took me 20 years to get there.
Right.
But I had a plan. And so I had to look at that and say, well, what do I love about epic fantasy? Well, I love the historical element, whether it was set in the real world or not. It was based on something in the real world, and that meant I got to do research. And research is so much fun because history has a lot of dirty secrets that they don't tell you in class, and you can find people haven't changed. They do all the same things they used to do. And, so there's this whole adult section of history that they never taught you in high school. That makes it fun. But there was the planning, and there was the plotting, and the kingdoms in collision, and the intrigue, and all those things that go into a Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, the multi-point of view and the sweeping saga. And I loved that. But I had to know what it was. Why did I like Lord of the Rings? Was I there for the elves? Was I there for Aragorn? Was I there because it was a saga and I wanted to see how it turned out? And then I had to bring those elements over to what I wrote. With urban fantasy, I had always loved. I cut my teeth on Dark Shadows literally as a preschooler because God knows why my mother let me watch it. But it had a sympathetic vampire in a haunted house and this totally screwed up family of witches and warlocks and moping werewolves. And so I was kind of preset for that. And then I loved every show that came out that had any of those elements in it. I said, well, gee, I need a vampire here. And I loved it when a reviewer told me I was really cutting edge because I had a vampire in my medieval book.
Yeah.
Thinking I had stolen vampires from urban fantasy. It was like, hello, Vlad Tepes, 1400s.
Exactly.
Go check that out.
Exactly. I did a medieval vamp
Yeah.
series too.
So original.
Yeah.
Well,
As
tell
long
us
as
you
they
don't
don't
know anything
sparkle.
about history.
Right.
Don't know anything about history. So that was it. Is what is the and then take the tropes, find out what the tropes are, as you were saying, find out what the rules are, and then break them. So my Deadly Curiosity series, yes, there's a woman who has the ability to know the magic and power of objects by touching them. She runs an antique shop to get the dangerous ones out of the wrong hands. Her business partner is a vampire. You know what? She and the business partner are never getting together. The vampire is a 600-year-old vampire. He looks at her as his great-great-great-granddaughter. He is her silent partner in business, but ew, why would he want to get together with her when she's a kid? She has a perfectly mortal boyfriend, and that works just fine. So if anybody is expecting that the vampire and the main girl always have to get together, no, sorry, not in my world, because I was tired of it, And besides that, what a 600-year-old want with somebody who's 25? How would you even have a conversation? So we talked about identifying some of the tropes. Can we clarify a little bit for people what we mean when we say tropes?
Yeah, tropes are plot lines, and I'm convinced that the hard definition of tropes became important with fan fiction, because that's how people found the fan fiction that they wanted. Right, tags, exactly right. But, like, for example, popular tropes right now in romance are enemies to lovers, there's just so many of them. And I'm trying to think. Cinnamon roll heroes are heroes that are just so sweet and so wonderful. They're bully heroes they're mean as hell until they're not. And basically they are plot lines that people like.
Age gap.
Huh?
Age gap.
Age gap. Yeah, like she was talking about a 600-year-old vampire and a 25-year-old woman. That's an extreme example of an age gap thing. And people talk about tropes in two very different ways. Some people talk about tropes as a very positive thing, as building blocks to story, and that is a very valid way to look at them. Other people talk about tropes, they use tropes as ways to criticize things. Oh, it's an age gap story, it's gross, or it's, but if you're a writer, you need to embrace it. You need to find out what tropes aren't necessarily popular, but what tropes exist within the genre you want to work in, and which ones appeal to you and which ones don't. And it doesn't matter if the most popular trope in your genre is something that makes you kind of throw up in your mouth a little bit. You don't
have to stick to it.
Right. You don't have to use that one. Because here's the thing, kids. When you start writing a book, even if you write really fast, like NaNoWriMo speed, and you write your first draft in 30 days, and you're going to have at least another 4 to 6 months of revising your book, and then you're going to have to spend, even if you're publishing it yourself, you're going to spend another 4 to 6 months packaging your book. By the time the book that you started today actually makes it onto Amazon with its keywords, all the popular tropes will be different. So pick the ones you like. Pick the ones you're passionate about. Pick the ones that work for you. I talk about romance tropes because romance readers, that's what they look for. But there are tropes in everything. The hero's journey is a trope. The quest is a trope. Real magic as opposed to waving your arms around is a trope. So
The girl who always runs and falls down in a horror movie. That's true.
right, the final girl is a trope. Some of the best writers in the world right now are playing with those. They know that their readership knows what these tropes are. Like Grady Hendrix was the final girl.
Found a support group.
Yeah, exactly. That he knew when he titled his book that his audience, the people that were going to enjoy that book, we're going to know exactly what he was talking about. Go, oh, that's hilarious. I got to read that book. So, yeah, audiences, readership is very, very familiar with tropes.
Mm-hmm. How about you?
I chimed in.
Oh.
That's your
Well, and you know, the tropes sneak in some kind of crazy ways, because when I was dealing with an editor with the Ascended Kingdom Saga, my second epic fantasy series, it is about a guy who is he's a disgraced lord, and he gets sent away to a prison colony for a crime he didn't commit. And then it turns out that the magic breaks, human-controlled magic breaks, and he's the only guy who might be able to fix it. Oops. Then my first series had an exiled prince. So there's a thing here about having privilege, losing privilege, regaining your place. And I had an editor who said, well, you know, it's a good series, but I kind of wish it had basically been the pig farmer goes on a quest and saves the world. It's like, well, that's a completely different set of tropes.
Right.
And I can write that for you next if you want. But that's not what this series is.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people really like the person who falls from a place of privilege, realizes how to become a better person, whether or not it was their fault that they fell or not, and comes back to save other people and reclaim their honor. Other people like the start from the pigsty and work your way up and fight your way to the top and earn your crown. It's all what quest turns you on, what speaks to your inner person. And that's very much the same with the tropes in romance or mystery or anything else. Do you want to read about somebody who follows their cat to find dead bodies every week and solve mysteries? I mean, really, after the first dead body, you start turning up bodies every week. I think the cops are going to put you away.
Right. Jessica Fletcher should have gone to jail.
Right. You can't just say it's my cat who finds the dead bodies.
Right, she's got one screwed up family.
Yes.
Because they're all her relatives.
Right.
Yeah.
But find out, go take a look at your bookshelf and see what do your books all have in common. And those are the cross-genre tropes that are calling you home every time. But you're absolutely right about fan fiction, because fan fiction does a wonderful job. I wish published fiction did as good of a job on tagging as fan fiction does. If you've ever been out on Archive of Our Own, if you want a story that has green werewolves who live in Maine, you can put that in, and if there are any stories out there, green werewolves who live in Maine, you're going to find them. Try that with Amazon. But I have also seen, as more people have come across from cutting their teeth in fan fiction to publishing original fiction, I'm starting to see that tagging thing show up on more and more book descriptions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's pretty much a good thing. What are the perils of crossing genre?
Okay, like you were talking about, you have your 600-year-old vampire and his 25-year-old business partner. Okay, the expectation of your reader is that they're going to get together. So if you're going to screw around with that expectation, I didn't say the F word, if you're going to screw around with that expectation, you have to do it so well that they're not disappointed. What did Gail say? She has a perfectly awesome mortal boyfriend. That lets your reader know, okay, yeah, you might expect me to go this way down the road, but I'm going to go on this road instead. Oh, okay, so it ain't about that. You have to make sure that everything else around it is intriguing enough, interesting enough, whatever, that first of all, your reader doesn't feel cheated, and secondly, that they're interested and want to keep going to the end.
Well, and actually, one way I also established that is very early in the series, Soren goes to visit. There is an elderly lady in a nursing home, and everybody thinks he's her grandson.
Mm-hmm.
He pays for her care, he comes to visit her frequently. She's his last mortal girlfriend. He will never have another because we break too easily and we die too quickly. And when he comes, she's suddenly alert and she remembers the past. It glamours her when he's there, and she's herself again.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody comments on what a great grandson he is. And he leaves incredibly depressed.
Right.
Because, he's watching her slip away.
Right.
But that really made the point on why he's not going to do this again.
Right.
So,
and again, it's the same thing we're talking about with everything else. You have to put yourself in the place of the reader. What would work for you? While we're talking about fan fiction, real quick, I want to slide one point in on fan. I came out of fan fiction too. The reason I ended up doing the Forever Night book was I wrote Forever Night fan fiction. If you're coming from there are a lot of great things about that. One thing you have to remember, when you're writing fan fiction, your audience already knows the characters, the world, they know who they crush on, they know what keywords to search in the archive to find it. When you're writing your own book, even if it's something that you're adapting out from a fan fiction you've written before, you have to do all of that work yourself. You have to make them fall in love with that world and those characters all over again in a completely different way. So don't think you can just change the names in your fan fiction and it'll be okay, because it won't. It'll be boring because your first 3 chapters aren't going to make any sense to anybody who didn't watch that show.
And realize that a huge number of authors, whether or not they admit it, cut their teeth on fan fiction. I was writing Hawaii Five-0 fan fiction in the 70s. So, yeah, they may not admit it, but it's a great training ground to learn how to write and what people like and what makes people respond and have conversations with readers. So it's a great place to cut your teeth.
Yes.
But yeah, there are a lot of us out there, whether they admit it or not. How about you?
Where were we?
Um,
Talking about,
what are some of the pitfalls?
Pitfalls, yeah.
So I'm not through my second latte yet. You expect me to brain?
I got sucked into the fan fiction. I was like,
It happens to the best of us, man.
And that's what good fan fiction does.
So what the biggest peril is like if you don't deliver what your reader is expecting, you're going to lose your readers. And that's why there are tropes and things like that as guidelines to kind of follow. Me, I personally don't always stick to them.
Well, you can surprise, you just have to also delight.
Exactly.
right.
Okay.
So, pitfalls, I mean, just like everybody said, losing readers, people being unsatisfied with the work, like talking about that lit RPG. The issues I have with lit RPG in general is that the games that are being portrayed don't make any sense, and I need the game to make sense if I'm going to believe that we're playing a game here, But, so, I mean, I really focused on game mechanics and making sure the game made sense.
Well, in a way, that's the same sort of issue with fan fiction, is that if somebody expects to come to a story and read it because they've played this game for 100 hours, and now this is going to be a written adventure in that gaming world, they're coming with a whole head full of expectations that you don't have to explain to them.
Right.
But for somebody coming to an all-new world that is not necessarily based on a game or wanting to take that further, then, yeah, it has to make sense. Yeah.
I think it's wonderful. I would love to blow the minds of the professors I had in grad school, where we were studying deconstructionism and meta-narrative and all that kind of stuff, and introduce them to the notion of a lit RPG.
Right.
Because, I mean, and it's just like with Bugs Bunny cartoons. Oh, that's just how it is. It makes perfect sense. You don't have to stand on your head and type with your foot to,
Right.
understand it.
I think the thing I find is that sometimes we have to read broadly. If I'm going to write an urban fantasy paranormal romance, then I had better read a lot of urban fantasy and paranormal romance so that I know how they work and I know what I like and what I don't like and what I expect from a book and what I consider good and what disappoints me. But we often don't realize that readers may not come to a new book with a broad comprehension of writing styles. So, for example, somebody did a review on one of my epic fantasies. Now, it's a classic epic fantasy. Not only is it big and thick, but there are 5 intertwined, braided, different points of view. That 5 different characters whose heads we're in, who all have different adventures that braid together, and finally they come to the same big battle. And this person said, well, I really liked the characters in the first chapter. And then in the second chapter, the characters was somebody else, and they were somewhere else. And by the time we got back to the people from the first chapter, they were doing something completely different. And I thought, this is someone who has only ever read first-person point of view YA. They have not gained the reading skills to understand what a traditional epic fantasy looks like and be able to follow the story, which is something that, love it or hate it, usually got beaten into your head in literature class, where you had to read books that you might not have liked, but by the time you discussed them, you understood why they worked in the genre that they worked in. And so I think that is a risk with cross-genre and with the different styles that are usually associated with genre, is that your readers may not be experienced in that particular genre, especially if they've only ever read something like YA, which is notoriously first person only. Which brings me to another question. First person, third person, one point of view, two, what do you do and what do you like to do? Lucy?
Most of my stuff is third person limited point of view, which is basically like there's a camera sitting on the shoulder of a character. Most of the stuff that I write is that. I have done some first person stuff, and the book I'm writing right now is about Mary Shelley. It is alternative history, paranormal, gothic horror. There's a big nasty ghost. And it is divided up into chapters from different points of view. All the stuff from Mary's point of view is first person, but then there's stuff from her sister's point of view, there's stuff from her other sister's point of view, that are limited point of view third person. But, however, meta, you find out from the first chapter, Mary's writing those chapters too. She is imagining what those people were seeing and thinking or whatever. She's a character in her own story in those. I don't advise doing that until you've been doing this for a long time. I'm about to turn 60. I've been doing it since I was 17. Because it'll give you a terrible, terrible headache. If you're going to do that kind of stuff, you really got to be comfortable with it. And you've got to make peace with the fact that there are some readers who ain't going to like it. So I don't think I would ever say I'm going to do that kind of stuff forever, but it's just that's what works for the story. And that, I guess that's the most important thing, what works for the story. The reason that YA novels tend to be first-person point of view is because YA novels tend to be coming-of-age stories or hero's journey stories or romance stories or whatever that are about a central protagonist coming from being this kind of person with this kind of experience to being that kind of person with that kind of experience. And you're following their journey. Everybody else is there as almost an NPC, to use a gaming term.
And there's a huge identification with that.
Right, exactly. The person who loves that book is the person who feels for that character. Love them or hate them, that's what's going on with the Twilight books. Love them or hate them, that's what's going on with 50 Shades of Grey. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that kind of narrative. There is no reason to poo-poo that kind of narrative. That is a hard thing to write, just like anything else is, because you have got to make that character believable, plausible, likable, relatable at every. If you've established your character through 50 pages as being this kind of person who reacts this way to this kind of stimuli, and then they do something completely different because you need them to do that to make your plot work, somebody's going to throw that book across the room and they're never going to pick it up again, and they're never going to read anything by you again because they don't trust you. Mm-hmm. So, pick the style that works for you and do it well.
Okay.
I like the third person point of view, like Lucy said with the camera. Because when I write, it's kind of like a movie playing in my head, and we're all probably the same. So basically, I write what I see and what plays out. Now, from not me recently had someone submit something in second person, and that was quite an interesting experience. Like you have to be, I think you have to be really experienced in writing second person to be able to have it and have it make sense, to keep your reader hooked.
Right, because even really, if your writing is so good that your reader goes, "Oh my God, this writer is freaking smart," that's bad. That's bad. You want them in the story. You don't want them thinking about you.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I read a short story that was written in second person, and I found it so jarring when the author described me, right? It's like,
I looked
I'm not a
You look like
brown-skinned
this.
pregnant woman.
Right.
I'm just not, you know? Like, I'm not really getting into this story. So, yeah, it was really
You
jarring.
have
experience.
told me this story is not for me.
Right, right.
Oh,
Yeah, I wasn't done.
okay.
No, all right, first person. Mostly I have to date, just because it works with the urban fantasy and the lit RPG. It's kind of the standard. I have my high fantasy that I'm working on that I'm planning to do third person limited for, just because it's bigger scale and I would have to leave a lot out if I could only focus on one person. You know, I need the king to be talking, have that conversations, and so people know what's going on and over that side of the country, and you know. You can't do that kind of stuff if you're stuck in one person's head.
Yeah.
And that is a big thing to consider is that's one of the reasons that epic fantasy tends to have multiple points of view, because you've got this kingdom and that kingdom, and then you've got the rogue knight and you've got somebody else. You need to know all those pieces to see them come together. If you're writing something with that sort of scope.
George R.R. Martin, children.
Yeah. The Deadly Curiosity series is first-person point of view. The Spell, Salt, and Steel series and the Joe Mac Chronicle series are all first-person point of view. Everything else is third-person limited, just because of where the story needs to go and what I need to be able to show people to get them where I want to take them. So, questions from the audience? Crossing genres?
So a question for you actually would, you have a pen name in addition, and anyone else who might have just not mentioned.
My husband doesn't call me Lucy.
What, like what goes into that decision of I want to separate these types of books go with this pen name, and these types go with this, and for those who don't use a pen name, why not?
Well, in my case, there's absolutely nothing secret about my pen name. I write full-time, so it's not like I work in an industry like a school teacher or somebody who, oh my God, people can't know that I write spicy romance. I don't care. For me, it was really that the Morgan Bryce books have explicit sex, and the Gail and Larry books do not have explicit sex, and I didn't want to give anybody a heart attack if they just picked one up and went, you know. And that's really determined by the genre that we write in, and just kind of a decision that, okay, this is urban fantasy with mild romantic subplot as opposed to this is paranormal with an equally strong romantic plot, and how it went. So yeah, that's why for us. But I know some people do have to protect themselves for their day job.
I actually have a funny story about that.
Don't use a pen name, don't plan to. I just have no need for one. My books, even though I might write in different genres, like I'm not going to have romance in one series, or, you know, like all that stuff is pretty across the board. One thing to add, a pen name, if you're making a decision about a pen name, keep in mind that a pen name is not an alternate identity, because there's been some trouble lately of people doing things under pen names that, like,
Don't pretend to be a different race at first.
yeah, don't have conversations
The fact
with
that we have
people
to say
pretending
that.
to be, you know,
You're not.
something you're not. Like you're not a different person because you get a pen. You're still you, you know. So
Yeah, I think mine's kind of the same as Gail's, because I am, because I am doing the paranormal thing that I am working on, and it does have male vampire sex. I don't want my mother to read that.
My parents are dead, so I don't know.
My mother would be dead.
We'll avoid that.
Yeah. So.
Because you're not supposed to know about any of those things, right?
Yeah. And there are two.
According to your
She
mother.
talked about that way too early. And plus, my readers here are different. These people that read this, they're ghost people. And whoever reads the next one I put out, whether it be this, along this line, those are going to be ghost people. My vampire people are going to be my vampire and my werewolves and all that. And then the romance factor that you toss in. So it's it's almost a genre within ourselves. Kind of.
Well, when I first started out, the first book I did, I used the pen name Anne Hathaway name because I wasn't the only author. I was writing it with somebody else. And rather than use both our names, we came up with one name and did that one book. But then when I did my first series, I used a version of my own name, which is J.L. Wiley. That's my family calls me, but it's Jayel spelled out, not the initials. And I did 3 books under that name. But then the next series was going to be the medieval vampires, and it was going to be a lot spicier and a lot more violent. And I did have a day job, and so I said, okay, I want to do a pen name. So I came up with the pen name Lucy Marks. And my editor liked it. Great. Book's finished, first book's finished, on production, whatever. My day job at that time was I was paralegal for the Drug Prosecution Task Force for the 6th Circuit Solicitor's Office in South Carolina. And I'm in a meeting with a bunch of DEA agents and lawyers and whatever, and the receptionist comes to me and goes, I'm so sorry, but your publisher's on the line. You need to talk to her. I'm like, okay, oh my God, what's the name? So I get on the phone, she goes, okay. She says, I'm talking to the marketing people, and they don't like Lucy Marks for a romance writer. They say it's not girly enough, it doesn't. So what can you be instead? Can we change this last name? So I'm sitting there rattling off possibilities. One of the drug cops, one of the DEA agents goes, Lucy Blue. I said, how about Lucy Blue? She says, oh, I love that. Meanwhile, I said, okay, so Lucy Blue. Meanwhile, that same guy's going, and she goes, yeah, I love it. She says, the marketing person who's with me here loves it. It's going to be Lucy Blue. But I hang up the phone and he's going, oh my God, you're going to kill me. I said, what? He said, okay. Until 3 days ago, I was in Bogota, Colombia. And in Bogota, Colombia, at my motel, there was nothing to do, and so I was watching porn that was made in Hong Kong. And the actress who was starring in it is named Lucy Blue. So she has apparently moved on to other greener pastures, but when my books first came out, if you did a search on Google for Lucy Blue, you got equal medieval vampires, Hong Kong porn.
And all the viruses to go along with it.
Exactly. Actually, there was actually a little bitty banner on the very first website I ever had that said, not the porn star.
Well, and this is a strange business, publishing, on so many levels. But I also realize that I know so many people by their I know enough people only by their alias that really I should be in like a criminal organization. I don't know their real
Very
name.
similar.
I only know their alias. And I'm constantly surprised when I'm reminded of this. So Tally wrote one of his books of ghost stories.
Mm-hmm.
And he dedicated it to his wife, real name.
Right.
And my first thought was, my God, does Alexandra know about this?
Exactly.
I just learned this last year.
So, it does raise some funny things.
Yeah.
Okay, let's let our wonderful, wonderful panelists tell you where they can be found online, and if you have any new, recent, or upcoming projects, tell us about it.
Okay. I'm Lucy Blue. You can find me online at lucybluewriter.com. I also can be found via email, lucy@falstaffbooks.com. And I'm not opposed to receiving emails from people asking questions and stuff. I have a medieval fantasy romance, hopefully coming out in October of this year, that until last night was going to be called The Devil's Bride, but then I found out in a panel that there's a very popular book that is out right now called The Devil's Bride, so it won't be called that. No, not the Dragon's Bride, sorry. Maybe I just found a new title. But right now, if you're here and you want to read something of mine, first of all, bless your hearts. Secondly, at the Falstaff table, I have the 4 installments of the Stella Hart romantic cozy mysteries. They're a 1920s set, silent movie actress who also solves murders. I have Bury Me Not, which is very spicy but also weird western with zombies. And I have my horror novel, The Devil Makes Three, which is a southern gothic, which is, I've been told, very, very scary.
I will be at the Gold Dust table for the rest of the day. But you can find me online at golddustpublishing.com, jasongeorgeauthor.com, and all the social medias. All websites have links to that. Let's see, coming up, I'm hoping to have The Acquisition, which is the paranormal romance, out in the next couple months. As for Gold Dust, we have a new release, which is an urban fantasy, action, adventure, romance. Keep going with those genres. It just came out on Friday. It is a new take on the Arthurian legend and features all clear characters at the forefront of the story. And then we have The Purple Menace and the Tobacco Prince, which is
A great title.
a great title, a great cover. Why didn't I write it? It's not mine, but at least I published it. It's historical fiction that takes inspiration from the life of Zachary Smith Reynolds, who was the heir to the Reynolds tobacco fortune. And he mysteriously died in the 1930s. Some say it was murder, some say it was suicide, some say the boyfriend did it, some say the wife did it. The wife says, "I'm pregnant, you can't question me." And so the family kind of just squandered it. Nobody really knows, so our author puts his own take on what he thinks could have happened. It's a great ride down through history if you like local history. So
Down at the my table toward the broken escalator. Just past that booth. You can find me online everywhere as author Ben Meeks. And I have my Where Otter and my first of the Lit RPG down there. And some pins I made. So come check it out.
I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. I'm on most of the main social medias under one or both of those names, so if you spell them right, you can find me. We'll have a new Deadly Curiosities book out probably by the end of June. We'll have a new Fox Hollow Zodiac Shifter romance under Morgan Bryce also in June. The latest book out is Castle Magic, which is a collection of 4 novellas that were originally done for the Kingdom Castle Shared World multi-author series. And I'm also the con runner for Continual. And so that is the online ongoing multi-genre convention that never ends. We launch usually anywhere from 4 to 6 new panels every week. And we cover fandom, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, comics, romance, and of course, supernatural. So, and we've got over 400, this is our 5th year, we've got over 400 different author panelists from all over the world. So check us out, it's all free. Thank you so much.
yes, thank you all for coming.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists, thank you for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your con.
Yes.